We move to our final session of this particular part of the morning. I met Mark in the States not too long ago and obviously knew of his work beforehand, but in talking through some of the things that he was sharing at the time and trying to sort of understand some of the concepts that we're faced with, it strikes me that what we need, and we always need, wherever it might come from, is somebody who actually challenges where we are and what we are thinking, and whether we're actually addressing the needs of young people that we all claim to be in that way, but somebody who is actually prepared to look behind some of the things that are being said and say what's really happening out there and what the challenges are. And I think Mark is the ideal person in terms of the work that he's done to set that challenge. So, ladies and gentlemen, will you welcome Marc Prensky.
Thank you all. And now for something completely different. They told me while we were getting the technology up here, and I assume it will be up in a second, I don't know if I have to push any buttons, I should tell a joke, so I'll tell a joke. Gentleman dies, goes up to the pearly gates. Shift F7. Yeah, that's right. He goes up to the pearly gates, and so he meets St. Peter, and St. Peter says, well, do you want heaven or do you want hell? He says, you mean I have a choice? The guy said, yeah, you have a choice. Well, can I see them first? He said, yeah, you can. So, okay, here's heaven. Shows him this very calm, musical, white sheets, classical music, very slow, passing by. Let me see hell. So he says, okay, bang, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Everybody's having a great time. They're partying. Guy says, I haven't really been that good. I think I want to go to hell. Guy says, are you sure? He said, yep, I'm pretty sure. Okay, zap. Whips, chains, fire, brimstone, the whole thing. And as the guy is going down, he says, well, what about what you showed me? Oh, that was just the demo. Be aware. Okay. I come to you this morning, first with great pleasure and thanks to everybody who's invited me here, and thank you to all the speakers who came before. Let's see if we can get this so I can see it as well. I come with 3 hats. One, the first hat is that I am an educator. And I have a degree in education, and I've taught at all levels, and I still tutor kids because I love kids. I have a hat as a software game developer for education, and I've done a number of those, including games for handhelds. My vision that I hope to deliver someday is a game where kids can teach themselves to read before they ever get to our educational system, so that we can do a whole lot more interesting things, and I'm sure that's possible. And the third hat is really my thinking hat and writing hat, and my latest book is Don't Bother Me, Mom, I'm Learning, which is about how computer and video games are preparing your kids for 21st century success and how you can help, and that's part of what I'm going to talk about. One of the interesting things that I do observe, though, and that I have observed, and that I observe all over the world because I really travel around to conferences about education and conferences that are about educating our kids, and I look at the audience and I say to myself, where are the kids? Because they have to be part of this equation. And that's something that we really have not gotten fully through our heads, that we can't in this day and age, any more than we could have a conference of men about women or a conference of women about men, we can't have a conference about young people without involving them and having a conversation. So my suggestion for next year is come to the conference and bring the smartest kid you know. That'll be good for twice the attendance, too. Okay, here's a question. How many of you sent an email in the past 24 hours? I'm going to assume it's everybody, right? okay? And this is not only the kids who say this, and I've heard more than one kid say, you know, the only person I email anymore is my mother. But this was a headline in the Chronicle of Higher Education last year. And the Chronicle is the newspaper for, the main newspaper for U.S. higher education. And what they were saying was that all the expensive email systems that had been put into place weren't being used. The kids had all switched over to instant messaging and other kinds of things. This is one of my favorite quotes. Most of us prefer to walk backwards into the future, a posture which may be uncomfortable, but at least it allows us to keep looking at familiar things as long as possible. And that's what lots of people are doing. The only trouble with that is this. We're supposed to have sound here. Big sound. Okay, well, that's because I didn't turn it on. We talk a lot about change, and that's what I'm talking about, but one thing it's important to realize is that we really haven't seen much in our lives. Those of us who are in this room, and I'm just going to assume that you're from more or less the same generation that I am. And what I mean by that is, yeah, we've gone to Mars, and yeah, there's all these new devices, and we'll talk about them, but pretty much we live in the same houses, we drive similar cars to similar jobs that we do in more or less the same way. And there wasn't much change until the end of the last century when digital technology started coming in, things started moving a little faster, and here we are, we start getting nervous. But here's what's coming, exponential change. Change is going to go through the roof from now on. Tools are coming, as we've heard, real fast. Here's 20 tools, one of which is handhelds. Didn't exist, most of them, 5 years ago. Won't exist, probably most of them, 5 years from now. So the speed of getting to know these, and we were talking about teachers, I'll talk a little about that later, is absolutely, it's impossible to learn to use all this stuff. So there has to be another strategy for teachers where we share with the kids. We're seeing the tools switching being close to instantaneous. Remember when people searched in Yahoo from somebody else's list? As soon as Google came out, 1 billion people switched overnight. Email to instant messaging, iPod to video pods. TV is now YouTube for a lot of kids who don't even watch standard TV. And flash drives, hard drives are going to be a memory in a couple of years. And this stuff is just happening and happening. The interesting part is that our students, the young people, only know the fast part of the curve. In the words of one science fiction writer, they were born to the idea of rapid change. And the change that threatens us often as immigrants is very empowering to the kids, to the natives. They want the change. They want it to happen as quickly as their devices change. Now, school, of course, and education changes very slowly. But the nature of education, because of this speed up, is going to change. We've been very comfortable as educators for many centuries and millennia, teaching kids to solve problems with whatever tools we had. If we were mathematicians, we had geometry and algebra and then the calculus, et cetera, et cetera. If we were literature people, we had certain analysis tools. If we were engineers, we had our own tools. But what's coming is that the problems are changing. So we need to invent new tools to solve problems. And that's a really different thing, because how many teachers see their job as helping students invent new tools? Relatively few. When I ask, I may get one hand in an entire university. But that's why things like handhelds are so important, because that's where we're going to invent these things. The new tools are going to be programming tools. They're going to be digital tools. They will get invented on the machines that the kids have. That's why when you say we have one computer for every 3 students, or even one computer for every 2 students, you don't have enough. You need one computer for every 1 student. Enough said. The kids say, and I interview kids all the time as part of my presentations, we grew up interacting through computers and cell phones, or as you call them, mobile phones. That's how we learn. And yet, despite a lot of the progress we've been hearing about, the reality is that we've been educating our kids, and we still are, and this is going on every day, with the same generation of technology as this. This is 18th century childbirth, and most of our education is 18th century education. It's mostly lecture-based. Medicine has moved. Education, not so much. The kids say to us, why do I have to adapt to the past? Why shouldn't I be taught in different ways? I am living in the 21st century, in case you didn't look. And here's the real reason why you should want your kids to have handhelds, so you can avoid things like this, right? They will hold on to that stuff for all they're worth. Better they should have a small one. You can take them on vacation. Here's what's coming. You know, we're hearing a lot about change, but change is coming much, much more quickly for our students than we think. Within 5 to 10 years, we're going to start getting cashless. Our mobile phones are becoming our wallets. They are in Japan and other places. That's already happening. We're going to start to see mobile phones and devices that have what we call today supercomputer powers, so we can do our own weather predictions or other kinds of things. We're going to see wearable and implantable devices within 20 years or less, where you can get whole views of the world through contact lenses. And within 30 years, if technology continues to double every year, which we all the scientists that I know assume it will, technology will be 1 billion times more powerful. Now that's within the lifetime of all our students and of many of us. 1 billion times, we don't know what that means. It certainly means that every book ever written, every movie ever made, every song ever written will be on a chip the size smaller than your fingernail that'll either be embedded in your body or hanging from the piercings that the kids are already putting in place to receive these chips. They know, they're not dumb. And likely within the lifetime of our students, if you believe Ray Kurzweil and others, machines will become more powerful than the human brain and possibly sentient. So when we're talking about these little things about should we put another computer here, should we assess this, all these piddly little things, they're going to seem like nothing. We're not dealing with the larger questions, which is how fast this change is happening, how different the world is going to look for our kids. We're going to get hit by a truck. Anybody who is wondering, will this just be a hump and will this change slow down? The answer is it won't. We have to get used to the idea. It's rapid change, even in our schools, even though they move slowly. Because the world the kids inhabit is hugely different. Here's a quote that I love, the very insightful kid. You look at technology as a tool or a set of tools. What are we going to put in? We look at it as the foundation. That's integrated totally into what we do. So folks, it's time to turn around and face the future. And the advice that I give to people, whether they're teachers or educators or anybody else, is feel the fear. Because the fear is real, and you should feel it, and the speed that truck is coming, but we have to do it anyway. What if we don't? We'll wind up with stuff like this. This is one of my favorite pictures, right? And it's not that the guys made a mistake. Anybody can make a mistake. But they don't have a clue, I don't think, as to what to do about it. And in case you think that that's just a fluke, I saw a newspaper that had almost the exact same thing happen the other day. Or this, right? Now, it turns out that we're ready for that one, because it turns out that the international English teachers have a sky patrol that if this ever happens, they go right into action. But what about this? Right? I'll make you feel good and tell you it's from the States, right? But we're not good at teaching context, are we? And then, of course, you know, so what? So what? Our kids can always get, as we say, we have a fallback, those high-touch, non-offshoreable jobs, right, like this. Okay, we don't want that, obviously. So let's talk about these 21st century kids. Who are they? The most important thing that anybody can remember or think about these kids, to me, is this. They're not little us's anymore. There was a time when they were, when kids were just little us's and we were grown-up little kids, and so we knew how to educate our kids because we just did what they did to us, and it worked, and we were educated. But they're not little us's anymore. Here's a little video.
Vind een sleutelhanger en een zusterpak. Ja, ik ga Jimmy er wat doorheen halen. Ja, ik ben zo echt. Nee, ze zien het nou. Oh, yes! Marcia! Ik ben er weer.
They're making commercials about this stuff. That means the advertisers have realized that it's mainstream enough that it's going to appeal to the parents. So today's kids are not the ones that the systems were designed for and that the teachers that we've been talking about were designed and trained to teach. And I put this down, and you may have heard this before, so I'll go real quickly. If I do in the States a back of the envelope analysis, I'll find all these kind of big figures for what the kids have accomplished by the time they're 21, and that's boys and girls. And I compare it to book reading, where that 5,000 is an absolute maximum, and it's more like 2 or 3 or less for most kids. And if those numbers aren't big enough, it's the generation that downloads 2 billion ringtones a year, I kid you not, 2 billion songs a month, and of course 6 billion text messages every day, most of them from our schools. And I call them the digital natives. The important part is that for these kids, digital technology is in a sense their birthright. That's what it means to grow up at the beginning of the 21st century. And here's my digital native. Sky is 2.5. And every time he sees a little device that's roughly that size, he picks it up and tries to talk to somebody on it. He's got robots that laugh and talk to him in English. He's got robots that talk to him in Japanese. He's got books that read to him. He's got his own music synthesizer. He's got all my old game machines and, of course, all my old mobile phones. So he's surrounded by technology. And he's been on my lap since the age of 1 playing Freddy Fish. One of his very first words was, "Papa Fish." There's a group in the States that surveys kids every year. They call it Net Day Speak Up Day. netday.org is the name of the group. And they interview kids through the schools on computers about their technology habits. And one of their very first conclusions was this: the young people are not just using technology differently, but they're approaching their life and their daily activities differently because of the technology. And what do I mean by that? I mean, it seems to me that there's something called an emerging online life of the digital native. And there's a chapter in my book and something on my website. But here's what I mean by this, and this is so busy I call it a reference slide. You can read it when you get these slides, which you can get by emailing me or the conference organizers. Everything in yellow, communicating, sharing, buying, and selling, those are things we all do. Adults do them, kids do them, people do them. But the young people have figured out ways to do these things online. They communicate through instant messaging and chat. They share blogs, MySpace, Facebook. They buy and sell on eBay. They exchange peer-to-peer, learn through Wikipedia, YouTube, and searching, Meet in Second Life, etc. This is not something, of course, that every kid does. They don't. But they're all tending in this direction. That's the way things are moving. And it behooves us as educators to really understand this life because it's very important to the young people. The greatest single differentiator, if you believe these guys from the researchers, is the social networking about this. Of course, what is that? That's the very first thing that in school we, right? That's not going to work. It also raises issues of equity, right? And in schools, those are the first people to raise their hands and scream, not everybody has the same technology. That's right. Of course that's right. Some have more access than others. But the thing that I found is that they're all digital kids, and they all know it. And I've heard this from people in rural Guatemala, and I've heard this from Nick Negroponte with his $150 laptop, who says you give the kid in rural Brazil the laptop, and in 20 minutes he's doing useful work. They know how to do this. They're great at sharing. They're great at teaching each other, unlike us. They're great at getting what they need. And our job is to help make this happen. That's another reason why handhelds are so important. Instead of bemoaning this digital divide, we should be part of the solution, right? That's where the handhelds, other devices that are affordable that we can use that are connected, come in. So then we can ask the question, why are so many kids tuning out of school today? And we've seen this, we've seen the results, we're obviously doing big investigations about this stuff. But the answer is pretty obvious. They're bored to death. And that's what they tell us. And you ask any kid and they'll tell you you're bored, or you ask any parent and they'll say, my kid is bored. What do they say? Why are they so bored? Whenever I go to school, I have to power down compared to my life outside of school. Not their devices, but their brain. And what is a result? You know, people call it ADD and whatever they call it. This is a t-shirt I saw a kid wearing in New York City, right? It's not ADD, I'm just not listening. And then they have to figure out some other way to get back, right? Or we do as their educators, right? What road are we going to take? Okay. So we can ask the question, why? Why are they so bored in school? Well, there's two possible answers. One, we're not teaching them the right stuff. Ka-ching. We are focused almost entirely in schools, in our curriculum, on the past. That's what it's about. We're not focused on the future. But what do the kids care about? In one of my panels, a teacher raised his hand and he asked the kid, he said, what's your passion? And I think he was being sarcastic because I don't think he thought the kid had a passion. And here's what the kid said. My passion is my future. That's what our kids are thinking about. They're thinking about the fact that by the time they grow up and have jobs, machines are going to be more powerful than the human brain. Technology will be 1 billion times more powerful. So we have to integrate that future in our curriculum. They need the things they read about in the paper. Gee, where's the nanotechnology and the bioethics and the programming and genomics and proteomics and biomimicry from the first grade on up? Because that's what the kids know about. For logical thinking, I was a math teacher, 2 semesters of geometry. Why don't we teach programming? And we'll talk more about that. We could teach the same logical thinking. There's a guy in New York teaching cyber English, making sure all the kids know HTML so that they can communicate the same way anybody who writes will communicate from now on the web. Or cyber social studies with simulations, creating them. Or cyber foreign languages, multiple language texting, or all that kind of stuff. We have to teach 21st century skills. And here's my view of what everybody's got a view of 21st century skills. I'll give you mine. They come a lot from this thing. How many people have read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Okay, if you haven't read it, I really recommend that you do. It's been on the bestseller list for 15 years. And the fact that, and I don't know if the minister is left, because the fact that we know what makes people effective and that we don't teach it to our kids is criminal. So I was going to have him arrested. Here's my view. People need to know the right thing to do. No matter what project they're doing, they need to know how to behave ethically, think critically, make decisions, solve problems, have good judgment. Doesn't matter what they're doing. They need that. They need to know how to get it done. That means they need to know how to set goals, how to plan, how to do self-direction and evaluate whether they're getting there. They need to do it with other people. They need to communicate with individuals and groups, mostly using technology in the future. They need to communicate and interact, as we'll see shortly, with their machines, which is the programming part of this. And they need to communicate and interact increasingly with a world audience, because now when you put something up on the net, it goes to the world. And that, interestingly enough, is where the technology comes in. It's almost all about some form of communication. That's what technology does for us today, whether it's with people or machines or the world. Then they have to know creative part, like creative thinking and designing and playing and finding their own voice. And they have to keep getting better at it. So being proactive, taking risks, thinking long-term, continually improving through learning. Those are the kinds of skills that apply to anything, and I think that's what the kids need to know. Now, how do you balance that against standard assessments? Or we call that in the US, no child left alive, right? It's not clear, although I think we could do with a lot less assessment, but we have to find some way. My approach is to try to get rid of stuff that's being tested. Curriculum deletion, really hard. People will fall on their swords over pretty much anything that you try to get rid of. But we're full. We can't add the future unless we drop stuff from the past. You know, like I tell people we should drop learning the multiplication tables, memorizing them. And people say, oh my God, how could you possibly do that? And I say, you know, once upon a time, we taught people to tell time by reading the sun and by figuring out and knowing lots of things they had to know. Somebody invented the watch. We just wear it on our wrists, and we're all willing to do that. Hey, that could be a calculator, kids. Why else are our kids so bored in school? The reason is we're not teaching them the right way. Ka-ching. We're not in the 18th century anymore. Here's the metaphor that I use for school. Kids, until very recently, intellectually now, used to grow up in the dark. They didn't know much about what's going on around them. They weren't connected until, of course, they came to school. And in school, we started opening up the window like a windshield wiper, and if they stayed in school a long time, they learned about the world. And we could be very proud of what we did as educators, because we were the people who showed kids the light, right? That's something to be proud of. There's only one trouble. In the 21st century, our kids grow up in the light. They're connected to the world from day one with television and the internet and their phones and everything else. And if we were smart, we would start with that as a base and say, turn on all your stuff and let's use it. But what do? We make them turn it off. We take that stuff away as they come into our school building systematically, and we bring them back in the dark. So we want to be the people who show students the light. The danger is that with the very best of intentions, we pull students out of the light into darkness. The question we should be asking, and this is why, why the handhelds come in, can we turn on the lights? You know, for the first time, it's interesting. For the first time in a long time, it used to be that we competed with tutors, but now our schools have other serious competition. Because the kind of learning that we're looking for, where the students learn in new ways, they use technology, they're highly motivated, they learn on their own, they learn with their peers, that's happening in spades. It's happening outside of school without us. And we heard about a little bit of this. But not so much, I don't say it's happening at home necessarily, but the education is clearly bifurcating, splitting in two, between school, where we give kids credentials, but we teach them stuff about the past. It's pushed on them, it's boring, they don't want to do it. And I call this other thing after school. It's not really home, because a lot of it happens in school buildings, it's clubs, it's robotics, it's programming, it's the games that they play, it's the internet. It's the future learning. That's where they get the 21st century learning. That's pulled by them, that's the exciting part. And that's where I think is the answer, or partially to the question that was posed by Francesc. When people have interesting learning to put out into the world now, They don't go to the schools. It used to be they would go to the schools. Now they say we're going to bypass the schools. This is the learning director of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. This is a doctor who does laparoscopic surgery for little kids. Avoid the schools at all costs. And the MacArthur Foundation that we heard from a few seconds ago tells us that the greatest opportunity for change is found in after-school programs. So the real question is, can school even compete? Or will it just go, if it was in an economic system, if it can't compete, it would disappear, right? But of course, there's the dark side of school. We have school so that our parents know their kids are safe when they work. And if that's the only reason we have school, we're going to be in big trouble. We need to figure out how to turn on the lights. The kids tell us there's so much separation between how the students think and the teachers think. You know, we go out and we buy smart boards. Right? We heard about smart boards in the office and all that stuff. I don't think we want smart boards. I don't think they're going to help us. Because the price of 5 smart boards, you can buy this. Anybody know what this is? This is a 3D printer, folks. You put in the information from the work you do, and it prints out in 3 dimensions whatever you built. You want to inspire kids? That'll inspire kids. That's the future. That's what kids want to know about. We teach the old style of teaching, delivering content, presenting and telling, linear stories, one thing at a time, one size fits all, face to face, like I'm doing, right? Immigrant teaching immigrants. Typically they go slowly, I don't. But that's so different than the kids who learn from being engaged, doing gameplay, random access, multitasking, having tons of choices, going online and finding it really quickly. If you think about that split, it turns out that after school, the kids have found a better way to learn. They've already found it on their own. It's over. The new paradigm for learning is there, because the old one was kids being taught, right? Somebody at the front of the room teaching them. That's boring. They hate when teachers talk at them. The new one is just kids teaching themselves with guidance. Engaging. That's what the kids find engaging. Really, really different. The interesting part here for us is that the old paradigm, the lecture paradigm, requires no technology. In fact, the technology gets in the way of a lecture. You got to pull out your laptops, you got to do all this. But the new paradigm demands that technology. So we're talking about making teachers more comfortable. Here are my 5 stages, and apologies to those of you who saw it yesterday. Teachers start out hiding from technology, right? They don't want, it's at the door, but it's threatening. They don't want to see it. Next step is they panic, right? But later they start to accept it. If it's not turned on, if it doesn't work, doesn't do very much, they'll allow it in their classroom perhaps. And then slowly they'll get to the point of comfort, right? Where they're taking care of each other, a little bit of synergy there. But that's not where we want to go. That's not enough. Where we have to get with technology is here. It's got to do something for us. It's got to be powerful. The kids know the power of technology because they can make it do what they want it to do. The difference, this is so important, the difference between the analog technology of the past and the digital technology of today is that the technology of today is programmable. And what that means in the largest sense, not the COBOL sense, it means you can make a machine do what you want. So the kids have their own songs on their own iPods, and they have their own ringtones, and they make the technology do what they want. They know they're the ones who can program, unlike many of us, right? I was able to program that. And they know that the programming is, and we saw it in context, but it's certainly one of the key tools and literacies of the 21st century. Because what needs programming? Only everything. Only our communications, our jobs, our schools, our government, our homes, our cars, our tools, our recreation, our curriculum. Everything is going to need programming going forward. What we don't know yet is how to help our kids learn to program in more and more sophisticated ways. And we're starting to see this. I see in Australian pockets where we're starting to teach kids game programming and other things. But it's so important that we do that. And of course, in the context of all those other things I talked about, why is this so important? Well, what if we don't do it? Anybody read this? I want you to think about this as you go off to lunch, because this sign, written in programming, says, "Now hiring." Thanks very much.